I'm Eva. That morning, I arrived at the office early as usual, my mind still foggy from a dreamless sleep broken by an unshaped nightmare. But even the worst dreams felt gentler than the reality I was about to walk into. The 13th floor of the Crawford and Bell building always smelled like burnt coffee and cheap perfume. I stepped into the main conference room at 11:30 a.m., clutching a lunch tray for the data development team. 3 salads, 2 turkey sandwiches, and a non-fat latte I had specifically ordered to match my sister Madison's preferences. She was the executive director, here the board's golden child, and the same person who once looked me dead in the eye and said, "Nice job running deliveries, sis." The conference room gleamed, with ceiling lights bouncing off the long glass table, making everyone look like contestants in a game show. Department heads in tailored suits laughed and chatted around the table while I weaved between them, trying not to spill anything from the tray. I placed the latte in front of Madison just as she was passionately laying out next quarter's growth strategy. She didn't look up, didn't thank me. No one in that room even acknowledged me. Not a nod, not a glance. I was just a shadow. Familiar, unnecessary. And then it happened. As I turned to leave, Madison abruptly stood up, latte in hand. She glided over to me like she was performing on a Broadway stage. "Eva," she said, voice so sugary it could rot teeth. "Remember what I told you last time about non-fat lattes?" I didn't even have time to respond before the scalding coffee hit my left thigh. It wasn't a slip, it wasn't an accident. I froze. The burning pain shot from my thigh down to my knee, my slacks soaked through, heat pressing in like I was suffocating. Madison gasped theatrically. "Oh my God, Eva, that was an accident. I hope you're okay. But hey, you're used to cleaning up messes, right?" The room erupted in laughter. That laugh, it wasn't loud, but it was sharp, clean like a razor. Some people covered their mouths, others turned away, but no one said a word in my defense. I stood there gripping the edge of the table, my jaw clenched so hard it numbed. No one offered a napkin, no one asked if I was hurt. They looked at me like I was a lunch break sideshow. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I didn't walk away. I just turned and looked Madison straight in the eyes. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling in smug triumph. And then the conference room doors flew open. No one saw it coming. No one expected who walked in next. Dorian, my husband, stepped in wearing a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, his gaze as cold as ice. He didn't need to speak. With a single glance, all the laughter vanished. He walked to the center of the room, placed his briefcase on the table, and slowly scanned every face in the room, pausing on Madison for exactly 3 seconds. "I just reviewed the surveillance footage," he said, calm but sharp as a scalpel. "Everyone in this room who failed to intervene during that harassment, effective immediately. You're no longer employees of Dorson Capital." No one could breathe. I had never seen anyone go pale faster than Madison. A man in the corner gulped so loudly it echoed. A young woman gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "HR will send the official notices within the hour," Dorian continued, eyes still locked on Madison. "And if anyone wants to file a complaint, I'll make myself available for a court hearing." No one moved, no one said a word. Dorian turned to me. He didn't touch me, didn't ask if I was okay, but his eyes said everything. I walked out of the conference room, my clothes still damp and the scent of coffee rising in faint, warm wisps. The sting on my left thigh wasn't as sharp as the looks from those who had chosen silence. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Dorian had done his part, like a punctuation mark, but that was just the surface. The truth was, without that public act, this company would have kept pretending I never existed. And that's exactly what they had done for the past 3 years. I joined Nolan and Pierce right after earning my MBA from NYU. Unlike what most people assumed, I didn't use connections. I didn't lean on Dorian, even though by then he was already a successful investor. I wanted to prove myself. Not as someone's wife, not as Madison's little sister. I wanted to walk through that door on my own merit. And I did. In my first year, I proposed building a seasonal-based consumer behavior prediction model, merging retail data with sociological trends. No one paid attention at first, until finance noticed that the model had helped boost second quarter revenue by nearly 8%. I thought I'd finally be recognized. Then one Monday morning, I saw Madison's presentation slides on the executive room screen. Her name was at the bottom right corner. The model was mine. From its structure to the algorithm, every line of code still bore my signature markers. I stayed silent. Back then, I told myself, it's fine, as long as the company grows. A month later, she was featured in the internal newsletter as the creative mind behind Q2 strategy. Not a single mention of me, no credit line. I got a short email from the HR manager. Thank you for your technical support. The next time I proposed launching a search trend analytics system using heat map data, Madison invited me to co-develop the project, then asked me to stay in the background for a more polished presentation. That's when I started to realize I was only allowed to shine in the dark. And everyone else? They didn't need much encouragement to follow along. I once saw a misforwarded internal email where the head of marketing, Alex Grant, joked, Eva should switch to running the cafeteria. At least she'd be seen there. An intern named Molly, who I had mentored for 3 months, accidentally sent a Slack message. Eva's the only person here whose role I still can't remember. The truth? They remembered. They just wanted me to believe I was nothing. One afternoon in March, I stepped into the elevator just as Madison and a few senior managers exited a meeting. They were chatting about an upcoming investor visit from Austin. As the doors began to close, Madison caught sight of me and casually said, loud enough for everyone, "Don't forget to refill the coffee, Eva. You missed the sugar last time." The whole elevator laughed. I stared straight at the floor, numbers without blinking. I had learned to stay quiet so well that they thought I'd given up fighting back. But what they didn't know was I saved everything. Every forwarded email, every original draft with timestamps, copies of every renamed slide deck. I stored them on a personal drive I named Aria, the name I once dreamed of giving a daughter, if I ever had one. It was a matter of survival, not revenge. I used to stay silent out of fear of being called a drama queen. In this place, if a woman stood her ground, she was labeled aggressive, too soft, and she was a burden. I'd been trapped between those extremes for 3 years. And Madison, my sister, the one who once read my 10th grade diary aloud to her friends as a joke, had evolved. She was more calculated now, more strategic, and had a whole corporation behind her. She didn't need to shout to take credit. All she had to do was walk up and smile in front of a camera. But I had changed too. I was no longer the girl in a blue cardigan hiding behind a presentation board. That morning, the wind was still, but the air in the first-floor lobby of Nolan and Pierce headquarters was tight enough to choke on. The reception staff wore new uniforms, the LED hallway lights were dimmed to a neutral hue, and the digital board slowly scrolled the words, "Welcome Mrs. Valerie Benton and the investors from Sterling Equity." Valerie Benton, my mother. Also a founding shareholder, and at 67, still moving every piece like a seasoned chess master. From charity galas to restructuring strategies, she always knew exactly where she stood and who she was pushing to the bottom. I stood about 3 steps away from the reception counter, holding a packet of documents I had prepared for the meeting. Madison had arrived early, seated comfortably in the VIP lounge, her hair neatly done, wearing a navy silk dress and pearl-colored heels, ones I knew for a fact Mom had picked for her. When Valerie walked in, she didn't glance around looking for me. The way she strode, confident, brisk, caused the younger staff near the pantry to leap up and greet her. I nodded slightly and said softly, "Hi, Mom." She gave me a quick side glance, no nod, no reply. Her look was like a fluorescent light, bright but cold, and completely devoid of warmth. When the investors from Sterling Equity arrived, she led them into the main hall. Each person received a company profile, one I had edited, rewritten, and polished line by line. But at the bottom, The name credited was solely Madison Benton, Chief Innovation Officer. I walked behind them, like an unnamed assistant. "Ladies and gentlemen," my mother said with poise and clarity, "let me introduce the person who led Nolan and Pierce through the post-COVID crisis, the mind behind all our technological transitions, my daughter, Madison Benton." Madison smiled, stepped forward, and shook hands with each investor. Polite applause followed. I stood next to the presentation screen, remote still in hand. No one turned toward me. No one asked, "Anyone else?" Valerie stood across the room, her eyes sweeping past me like I was a side table. Then she turned back to the audience, her voice dropping with deliberate weight. "This company is family, and in a family, we believe in those who create vision." The word create might as well have been bolded. I stepped back, slipping into the edge of the LED screen's shadow. As Madison delivered the speech fluently, I realized it was the exact draft I had written 2 days earlier. Only 3 sections had been altered. The rest, word for word, was mine. During the Q&A portion, an older investor, Mr. Harold Stanton, turned toward me, visibly puzzled. "And you are... Sorry, I don't see your name on the coordination list." I managed a calm smile. "I'm Eva Benton, head of the data modeling division." Valerie cut in immediately, her voice clipped and mechanical like a typewriter. "Eva supports behind the scenes. She's great with system operations. Madison handles the strategic direction." Support? That word again? I nodded, said nothing more. Speaking up now would seem disruptive, and I didn't need to because the air had already fractured long ago. At the end of the session, while the investors toured the office, I slipped away from the group. I needed a minute to breathe. I ducked into the data tech room, the coldest room on the floor, and leaned against a bookshelf, pressing down the cramp twisting in my stomach. On the desk lay a research funding contract with MIT, a deal I had spent nearly 4 months negotiating. I opened it to check the signatures. Madison, the CFO, not me. My name no longer existed on what I had created. I pulled out my phone, opened the ARIA folder, and snapped a picture of the document, not to threaten, but to remind myself I wasn't imagining it, that what was happening was real. When I returned to the hall, Madison was mingling with the crowd, holding a glass of white wine, laughing with Harold Stanton. Valerie stood beside her, beaming like she had just secured a Senate seat. I stood at the doorway, looking at the 3 of them. 2 people who brought me into this world and 1 who pushed me under it. And I thought, if this is family, why do I feel like the intruder? And in that moment, I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't wait for someone to rescue me. I was going to rewrite my own place, line by line, with the same quiet they once mistook for weakness. I started with a black USB stick no bigger than a thumb, encrypted and never connected to any internal network. In my office, tucked between 2 rows of filing cabinets long forgotten by others, I set up a parallel storage system. Every evening, after my coworkers had left, I copied each original file, proprietary slides, experimental models, signed comparison charts, time stamps, final edits. I placed everything into a folder labeled 13A, an internal code tied to the first project ever stolen from me. Each piece of evidence was like a battery, small, but together, powerful enough to trigger an alarm. I also installed screen recording software on my office computer, configured so that every time a file bearing my name was modified by another IP, the system would automatically log it. In my email, I created a private label that forwarded every internal message related to my projects to a separate address under the name E-Rose. No one at Nolan and Pierce knew this address, except me and Dorian. Every action I took had a clear purpose. Not to retaliate, but to protect myself. I also began recording meetings where I was invited to observe, especially those where Madison presented strategies based on the models I had developed. During one virtual seminar with our Korean partners, I caught Madison responding to a question about the data structure. We built this entire framework from scratch with support from the tech department, but the concept was mine. She didn't even remember how to pronounce the name of the core algorithm. I didn't react. I simply saved the recording, clipped the relevant part, and labeled it stripped credit. About 3 weeks later, I received a LinkedIn message from Megan Riley, the strategy director at Whitestone Group, a tech firm specializing in healthcare data. Eva, I heard about the seasonal location model you developed. Tremendous potential. Could we schedule a conversation? We're looking for someone to lead our regional market integration team. I read the message 3 times, not because I was surprised, but because it felt like a quiet hand on my shoulder I hadn't realized I needed so much. We met at a cafe in Westwood. Megan showed up with cropped silver hair and a warm voice. No pressure, no tactics. "We don't poach," she said. "We're looking for people who truly understand the problem." She showed me the job description: Director of Applied Analytics for the region. Full authority to build a new team, a starting budget of $1 million, no approval needed from any family board. I didn't give an answer right away. I just said, "Thank you for seeing me." That night, I went home and opened the living room window that overlooked Century Bridge. The early June wind was dry and cold. I held a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and placed Megan's offer next to that day's backup packet. The 13 folder now contained more than 120 files. I typed a single line across the center of the email draft addressed to myself, with the subject, "If I disappear tomorrow, what will remain?" And I knew the answer, the truth. The second quarter strategy meeting was held in the 22nd floor conference room, reserved strictly for senior executives and strategic stakeholders. With a 60-seat capacity, an internal live stream system, and an LED screen large enough to make even sub-fonts legible. I wasn't officially invited, but I showed up anyway because I knew what was coming. The opening slide of Madison's presentation read, "Project Lumen, Terrain-Based Weather Behavior Analytics, exclusive from the Strategic Innovation Department." Nearly laughed. Strategic innovation here meant Madison, and that project was the exact model I had built from raw satellite data 4 months ago. She stood center stage in a silver-gray suit, eloquently presenting a 6-month market research process, proprietary layered analysis, and proprietary interpolation algorithms, all language directly lifted from my original report. When she reached slide 9, the comparison between shopping behavior in Phoenix and Milwaukee, I raised my hand. Every gaze shifted toward me. Madison froze for half a second, then smiled. "Eva, you have a question?" I stood up, calm, clear. "Would you mind sharing with the room the last time you were directly involved in building this model?" The silence dropped like someone had hit mute across the entire space. Madison was still smiling, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "Eva, I think there's some confusion here. This was a team effort." I didn't back down. And who was on that team? Because the 3 input data sets, the regional consumption flow chart, and the classification algorithm, all came from a system I built and personally verified. Some murmurs broke out around me. Someone whispered, "Lumen was Eva's, wasn't it?" At the far end of the table, Matthew Reed, the chief technology officer, arched an eyebrow. "Eva," he said slowly, "do you have documentation regarding intellectual property within our system?" I nodded. "Yes, all original files, edit logs, email chains, and system logs were submitted to legal this morning. I've also sent a copy to an external IP attorney, formerly with Whitestone Group." Madison visibly froze. Under the table, I saw her grip the remote control tighter. Mr. Reed turned to Loretta Shaw, the head of legal, a black woman in her 60s whose voice never needed to rise to silence a room. "Loretta, can you confirm receipt of the file?" Loretta nodded and opened the folder in front of her. "Complete. Includes metadata, timestamps, and internal video. Sender, Eva Benton. Intellectual ownership established under the original creation clause." I didn't need to say more. I sat down. The room stirred. No longer whispers, but actual discussions. Jonah, a data analyst I had mentored, raised his head. "I can confirm Eva built to the core. She taught me how to normalize the input streams." Someone from QA chimed in, "We received materials from Ava's account. We never worked with Madison during testing." I didn't look at Madison. I didn't have to. I knew that by now, her gaze was no longer piercing into me like a blade, but searching for an exit. The meeting ended 13 minutes early. An internal investigation was announced to begin within 3 days by direct order of the CEO, who had silently attended the meeting via Zoom and hadn't looked away once. I closed my notebook and walked out while most were still stunned. From behind me, Mr. Reed called out, "Yeah." I turned. "You'd better brace yourself. These things are never simple, but this time, you've got the file and you've got people." I nodded. I know. Next Monday, no one could predict what would happen. But the atmosphere at Nolan and Pierce that morning was undeniably different. Like everyone could feel a shift coming, yet no one dared name it. Fresh flowers at reception. The coffee machine in the pantry polished until it gleamed. Mid-level execs wore suits sharper than usual, walking more quietly, eyes scanning calendars while pretending not to notice the private 10 o'clock meeting. Though everyone knew, it wasn't an ordinary internal check-in. I stepped into the central boardroom on the 18th floor, where executive strategy sessions usually took place. A silver USB was already plugged into the laptop connected to the main screen. I adjusted my sleeve cuff and took a deep breath. Madison walked in right behind me. She wore a crisp white suit, smiled gently, but her eyes were razor sharp. "Eva, you really should rest," she said lightly, placing her phone on the table. "Last week did more damage than you think." I didn't reply. The door swung open. 3 men in black suits entered, 2 in front, 1 behind. They offered no greetings, no pleasantries, yet the entire room shifted under their presence. The man in the back was Dorian. Not the casual Dorian we all knew, but the one people whispered about, but had never seen. CEO of Aldane Capital, silent orchestrator behind 72 subsidiary companies, once dubbed the quiet architect of West Coast market realignment. Madison visibly paled. "Dorian," she forced a steady voice, "what brings you here in person?" He didn't answer right away. He placed a thick folder in front of Loretta Shaw, our head of legal, then handed another to Matthew Reed. "I'm here as the new controlling stakeholder of Nolan and Pierce," he said clearly. "Aldane Capital has finalized acquisition of 32% equity through a trust vehicle. With it comes the right to restructure the executive board." The room froze. Madison opened her mouth to object, but Loretta spoke first. "We confirm this is fully legal. Aldane is now the primary voting authority." Dorian turned to Madison. "For the past 6 months, your decisions have led to serious internal grievances, violations of intellectual property protocol, and signs of discriminatory behavior, all documented. I'm not here for discussion. I'm here to act." He faced me. "Eva." I stood, walked forward, and activated the projector. The first clip appeared. Security camera footage showing Madison deliberately bumping into me with a latte during last week's meeting. The angle left no doubt. Deliberate steps, a quick glance around, a smirk 1 second before the spill. No one breathed. Madison was frozen. Next, leaked internal emails. V is just our diversity checkbox, sent by a senior assistant with Madison on the CC line. Then, screenshots of presentation decks with metadata clearly crediting me as the original author, directly contradicting the versions bearing Madison's name. Lastly, audio of her on a call with a foreign partner, fumbling through a faulty explanation of an algorithm I wrote. I shut off the screen. The silence lingered. Dorian nodded. "By internal policy and our new governance authority, I hereby suspend Madison Benton from all roles at Nolan and Pierce. Her case will be reviewed by the Ethics and Legal Board." "You can't do this," Madison snapped, her voice cracking for the first time. "This company was my mother's. I built it." "Built it with what?" Dorian asked. "By erasing your sister? By stepping on people and covering it up with a rehearsed smile?" No one defended her, not a single voice. "Valerie," My mother appeared at the doorway. She didn't step inside, just stood and watched. Madison turned, desperate. Lang. Valerie stayed silent, not a nod, not a word. She looked at me, long and steady, then turned and walked away. When the door shut behind her, I knew I'd never hear a "well done, sweetheart" from the woman who gave birth to me. But I also knew I didn't need it anymore. I unplugged the USB, returned to my seat, calm as if I'd never stood up. Dorian gathered the folders and handed them to Loretta. Begin the review of all compromised IP from the past 3 years and issue a formal collaboration invite to Whitestone Group. Eva will lead the joint team. I looked at him. No need to say thank you. We had been through too much to waste time on simple words. Outside, the office hummed on like always. But on the 18th floor, something irreversible had just shifted. Not through force, through evidence, through truth. Madison left Nolan and Pierce on a rainy Friday afternoon. There was no farewell party, no goodbye email. She stepped into the elevator with a blank stare, one hand dragging a suitcase, the other clutching a beige handbag I once saw our mother pick out for her during a shopping trip in Manhattan. No one stood, no one looked back. The silence that day wasn't tense. It was a quiet relief, as if the entire building had just shed a thick layer of dust built up over the years. 3 days later, Madison's internal account was fully deactivated. Her name vanished from the org chart, and her auto-reply email held only 2 lines. No longer employed here. For inquiries, please contact the legal department. I sat in my new office, still on the 18th floor, but this time with my name etched clearly on the frosted glass, Eva Benton, Acting Director, Data and Analytics Ethics. I didn't choose the title CEO, Dorian offered, but I declined. I didn't need a title to clean up what had been bent out of shape. I just needed the power to set right what should have been right all along. The first thing I did was reinstate the internal credit policy. Every product, every project, every report from now on would require a formal recognition form, clearly listing the creator, the collaborators, and the reviewers. No more joint effort, no more behind-the-scenes support. I also launched an anonymous reporting system, allowing any employee to report ethical violations, from credit theft to verbal harassment, without fear of being traced or retaliated against. The data was encrypted, reviewed by an independent 3-person panel outside the executive team. Then I held a company WACI meeting. No PowerPoint, no spotlight. Just me standing in the main conference room, facing nearly 100 people, some of whom had known, ignored, or participated in silence. I'm not here for revenge, I said clearly. I'm here to begin again. But we won't rebuild by burying what happened. We will acknowledge it and learn from it. There was no applause, but no one left. They listened, truly listened, and stayed until the end. After the meeting, I found an envelope silently placed on my desk. No sender. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for not yelling at us, even though you had every right to. Not long after, I signed a contract with Whitestone Group, not just as a technical partner, but as a strategic ethics partner. They agreed to fund the Data Builders Scholarship Program, aimed at supporting women of color pursuing studies in data science and information engineering. 4 students were selected in the first round. I didn't ask for transcripts. I only requested 3 things in their applications: a personal story, their motivation to change the tech industry, and one time they felt overlooked but couldn't speak up. One afternoon in early July, I returned to the office from a meeting at the Research Institute and saw Valerie, my mother, standing outside the glass wall of my office. She wasn't dressed in her usual power suits, but in a knit coat, her face makeup-free, silver strands clearly showing at her temples. I opened the door and invited her in. She remained silent for a long moment, then said, "I read everything. Not to argue, just to understand." I didn't answer. She looked up at me, for the first time, without pride or judgment. I thought, I believed you needed to be corrected. Turns out I just didn't have the courage to accept that you didn't need anyone to draw your path for you. I poured her a cup of tea. No sugar, no milk. We didn't talk much, but the space between us was lighter than in any conversation before. When she left, she said only one thing. Don't let anyone rewrite your name again. I nodded. In August, Nolan and Pierce officially released its internal ethics code, the first in the data analytics industry to include specific protections for whistleblowers and formal recognition of intellectual contributions. An article in Fast Tech Review called it a quiet revolution led by someone who never raised her voice. I declined interviews. I didn't attend PR summits. I just worked. One evening, while I stayed late reviewing research forms, the maintenance worker came in. His name was Luis, the one who always quietly cleaned the 18th floor. He hesitated, then said, Eva, things are different now. No one's scared to take the wrong step anymore. I smiled. Thank you for letting me know that. When I locked up around 10 p.m., it had started to rain lightly. I stood under the awning, took a long breath, remembering the days I used to walk this hallway, coffee in hand, laptop weighing down my shoulder, unseen, unacknowledged. Now I walk the same corridor, standing tall, my shoulders weightless. They used to call me a shadow. I didn't need to scream to change that. I just needed to keep the truth intact until the day it spoke for itself. Eva's story is a powerful reminder that strength doesn't always come from noise. Some people don't fight with shouting, but with quiet resolve that never backs down. In real life, if you've ever been pushed aside or seen your name vanish from something you built, remember, silence isn't surrender. It might be the preparation for truth to rise clearly at the right time and in a way that can't be erased. What do you think about Eva's journey? Was she too quiet, or was that calm her greatest power? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more deep, real-life stories about family and resilience.